So once again, my name is David. I'll be speaking today, and the topic is practicing truthfulness. I've had this topic a couple of times before, so it's always interesting to try to come up with new things to talk about, because you don't want to repeat yourself too much. And I wanted to start by reading from the foreword for Norm Paulson's autobiography, Life, Love, God. A very short reading. The life story of Norman Paulson will give to those who search spiritual competence what the good book should have revealed in the beginning. His writing will prove to humankind his great spiritual courage to write this book. Humanity has searched for a greater understanding of itself in many spiritual institutions, either through ancient beliefs or in modern creeds. Man was given divine intelligence when created, but in due time, man forgot his Creator. This was the beginning of his downfall. Worldly concepts were man's only ambition. He was given freedom of thought, but with warning. For those who have an opportunity to read this book, the truth is now open. If you know the truth shall set you free. A couple of weeks ago at our Sunday service, we were singing a song from way back in the old days, and Al, our band leader, he mentioned that this was a song that was could have been around the same time that Mike Pinder from the Moody Blues was at visiting Sunburst. And I just happened to have been there when Mike Pinder was visiting. And this was in the summer of 1972. And not only Mike Pinder, but maybe all of the Moody Blues were there. I'm not really sure. There were a number of them. They were traveling around in an RV, and they parked their RV across the road up at the farm, Sunburst Farm. And I didn't really visit with them. I was a brand new brother, and I was pretty young, and I knew who they were for sure because I listened to their music quite a bit. But they shared a story with Norm that when they were first starting out in England, they were just a young band and they were touring around England. And that one night, late at night, when they were driving home on a country road, they saw a light that was descending into a field nearby. And they were really kind of shocked to see it, and they stopped. And they got out, and they were looking at it, and then it started moving towards them, and they just piled back in the car and drove off. But for anyone who's familiar with Norm and read any of his books, he does also talk about encounters with beings of light who travel in ships of light. And maybe that's why the Moody Blues came to see Norm and to visit Sunburst, because of that connection. But if you listen to their music, I think that brief encounter may have really had an impact, because their music was so cosmic, especially for that time, just so beautiful and so expansive, and pretty amazing. But it made me think about that year of 1972, and it was the first year that I was at Sunburst, and I stayed at the farm for almost a whole year. And Sunburst was exploding at that point. When I first came to the farm, there were maybe 30 or 40 people there, and then we had a small community back in the backcountry that we called Lemuria Ranch. And there were a few people back there too. But by the end of the year, I don't know how many people there were, but there had to be maybe 150 people, because we were really starting to open a lot of businesses and things were really going gangbusters. But in reflecting on that period, I was also reminded of someone else who visited that year, and that was White Bear, one of the Hopi Indian elders. And he's the one who wrote the foreword that I read just now from Norm's book. And today, the topic is practicing truthfulness, so I'm only going to try to say what I know for sure. But I did hear some stories about how White Bear found Sunburst and was introduced to Norm, but I'm going to hold off because I'm not 100% sure. And but before I came in March of 1972, either earlier that year or at the end of 1971, White Bear and Norm traveled to Hawaii together to speak at a New Age conference that was happening. And the story that I heard was that White Bear was kind of amazed that many of the Hawaiian words, the Hawaiian language, had sort of there were similar words to the Hopi language. It seemed like there was a real connection there. And then the Hawaiian people have kahunas, and the Hopi people have kachinas, and they're basically spirit beings who are helping support and watch over the people. It was really, I didn't have a chance to really hang out with White Bear that much. He brought seed of the 4 colors of Hopi corn, the blue, the red, the yellow, and the white. And he brought them back to our back ranch, and they planted that corn, and it's really a hardy corn, and I don't remember how deep, but you were supposed to plant it actually a few inches deep, and that it would just draw the moisture up out of the ground. And so we grew the Hopi corn back there that first year. And again, I wasn't there to see that, but I heard that it did really well. And he shared a lot of his wisdom with us. And he also was a really accomplished artist. And in particular, he made kachina dolls, which are replicas of these kachina spirit entities. And he painted the ancient Hopi symbols. And I do remember seeing him painting those, and I believe they are the same ones that are hanging in our lodge right now. He painted them all those many years ago when he was here. He shared with us something really profound, and it's the one thing I always remember about White Bear. On the cover of most of the copies of the Book of the Hopi, there's a symbol, and in the center of the symbol, there's a little animal with a rainbow over its back. And he told us that the animal is a skunk. And he said what it symbolizes is that once you get the scent of the skunk on you, it's hard to get off. And that once you are touched by the calling of spirit, or to get the scent of spirit on you, you'll never be happy until you fulfill that destiny of your search for spirit. And I always thought that was really good. And then I don't remember him talking about the rainbow over the back, but in our Sunburst teaching, we talk about the rainbow path to spirit, and that the rainbow represents the different energy centers within our spine, and they're each represented by a different color. So possibly the rainbow over that little skunk was connected to that same understanding of our path back to spirit. Just by chance, I guess, if things do happen by chance, 20 years later, I was living in Sedona, Arizona, and managing a natural food store there, New Frontiers. So when White Bear came to visit in 1972, he was 67 years old, and I was 20 years old. So in 1992, he was now 87 years old, and I was 40 years old, and he was living in Sedona, he and his wife, Naomi. And I used to sometimes deliver groceries to them, which is such an interesting connection back from all those years before. But I remember Naomi, his wife, talking about how when they were writing Book of the Hopi, that the Hopi elders, and there were about 20 or 25 Hopi elders who would come to their house like daily, I believe, and they would record into a tape recorder the stories of the Hopi creation story. Basically, the man who wrote the book, Frank Waters, said it's basically the Hopi Bible. It's got so much information in it. So for 3 years, these Hopi elders would come. They would speak in their native tongue into the recording device. And then White Bear and Naomi would translate it into English, and then Frank Waters would write it and wrote the Book of the Hopi. And the Book of the Hopi in the 60s was pretty well known in kind of metaphysical circles, and people were really reading it. I don't really know how many people read it now, but it was pretty popular back then. And I just remember Naomi telling me that story, and I could tell how meaningful it was to her that she had been a part of that really sacred event that had taken place when, for 3 years, they worked on this book together, and these dedicated Hopi elders came and recorded their history. So I was thinking about, in terms of our topic today, practicing truthfulness. That was a real practice of truthfulness. They were really making a disciplined effort to make sure that they got down in writing for all future generations the history, the very sacred history of their people. And I also remember in Sedona back then, in the early 90s, 92, 93, that White Bear, he was 87 years old at that point, but he was still doing his paintings and still making kachinas in his house. And when I went over there one time in particular, there was a young gentleman there who was working with him to learn that craft that he was passing down. In White Bear, he lived till he was born February 6, 1905, and he died on his 91st birthday. So he came in and left on the same day, which was interesting. And another thing that I just found interesting to me is that he was 23 years older than Norm, and Norm was 23 years older than me. So, whatever that means, but here we are now. I'm older than he was when I first met him, and keeping our history continuing on is very important to me, as it is to many people who are here. We had 3 stores in Arizona, natural food stores, one in Flagstaff, one in Sedona, and one in Prescott. And White Bear made us a kachina doll for each store. And we had it prominently placed up high on a shelf above the shelving in the store to kind of look down over the store. And it felt like a real blessing of protection. And what's the word? Growth. Our stores did really well in Arizona. So for a lot of us, practicing truthfulness, maybe we're not connected to something as ancient and important as the Hopi culture. So maybe we don't have something in that regard that we feel like we're connected to, that we need to really make sure we lay down for future generations. But we can all practice truthfulness just in our own lives. So I was thinking about practicing truthfulness, and it kind of might give you the impression that you need to practice truthfulness because you're not always true. You're not always honest about things. And so I started thinking about the idea of when you want to make a change and you want to stop doing one thing that you're doing and you want to turn it around into a better activity, you might have to change a habit that you have. And in this case, a habit might be talking without thinking, which I know we all can do sometimes. Some of us more than others. But I heard years ago this idea that breaking a habit, it was the example was used. Was like when you're shooting a rocket into space. It takes so much jet fuel or rocket fuel to break out of the Earth's atmosphere. It's just like it takes like 90% of the fuel that you're going to use on the mission just to break out of the atmosphere of the Earth. And that changing a habit or breaking an old habit, it takes a tremendous amount of fuel to do that sometimes. And you need to really be disciplined if you want to make a change like that. And I was thinking about that with every rocket launch, there's also a countdown. And it usually starts at 10 and it counts down to 1. So maybe a way to practice truthfulness is that before we, launch off with whatever we feel like we're going to say about whatever we've heard, we can just take a little countdown and make sure the things that we're going to say that we actually know what we're talking about. And then that reminded me of another gentleman who coincidentally was born in 1905. And his name is Viktor Frankl, and many of you may be familiar with Frankl. And he was born in Austria, and during World War II, he was incarcerated in 2 or 3 different concentration camps by the Nazis. And he was one of the people who survived that horrible experience. But he went on to become, he was a neurologist, a psychologist, and a philosopher. He was employed, I think, at the University of Vienna in his later years, but he spoke worldwide. And he talked about his experience in the death camps. And one of his most famous quotes is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." And many of us here are familiar with that because we've talked about that before. This idea that we have the opportunity to take a breath or two before we respond to anything that comes to us, because the only real freedom, as Viktor Frankl would say, the only real freedom that we have, the only real power we have, is how we're going to respond to the things that are coming at us in life. And because things are always coming at us, and we have the choice many, many times in that moment to either take possession of our own truth and practice the truthfulness within us of who we are, or we can become the victim of the things that are coming at us. And in Frankl's case, Viktor Frankl's case, I mean, he was probably in a position that none of us will hopefully ever be in or can even relate to, where all of his freedoms were stripped away. And he still found a way to make a choice of how he was going to respond to the horrible things that were happening to him and around him. And he called it the final freedom. This is our final freedom when all other freedoms have been taken away. We have this freedom and this truth within us that we can rely on. It's almost hard to relate to, but very inspiring when you think about his life. So maybe by counting down before we speak, or by thinking about how we're stretching out the space between stimulus and response, we can find ways to get in touch with our inner voice that always speaks the truth, because our most inner voice is coming from deep, deep inside of us, beyond our mind, beyond our emotions, but connected to divine spirit, connected to the source, and we have that within us, each one of us. So let's take some of these ideas into our silent meditation. Meditate together. Try to feel that space within us that is so very, very present all of the time and waiting to come to the surface and express itself through our laughter and through the joy that we bring to others and just through our personalities in general. I have a few closing comments. At the foundation or the central core of Sunburst and the Sunburst teaching is the idea that everyone is created with the ability to improve and to make positive changes in their life and to literally have a soul awakening while they're still alive in these bodies. And I know that some of you in this room have had different levels of awakening, and it's just a real blessing if that's happened for you. For others, possibly in meditation, you just feel a deep peace that comes over you. And that is every bit as powerful and as confirmation or as confirmatory as these other, what might seem like greater experiences. Because Spirit is with us all the time. So Norm, the founder of Sunburst, he spoke regularly about this inner orb of light, which at different times he called different things. But it is an orb of consciousness that is always available and always present in our lives. And when we meditate together, there is this inner orb, this inner sun that hovers above us. And when we are meditating by ourselves, we can feel the deep peace that comes from it. And then when we meditate with others, like in a group like this, many times we can feel it even stronger. And we are creating a healing energy of light that is expanding out and helping with the consciousness of the planet. And there's many, many other groups of people and individuals across the earth that are doing the same thing. But Norm used to talk about that this light, as it descended out of this inner orb of light, that maybe some of you can see with your inner eye. Most of us can't. But if you can, or if you can't, just imagine it's there, because it is, that the light descends in a vortex out of the light and into us. And that we're connected to that through these vortexes of light. And back in the early days at the farm, he used to talk about how there was a master vortex over the farm. And I believe it. There was such a sense of protection when you walked onto that property. And there was the devotion and the intensity that people had about seeking Spirit was so strong. Well, I know when people drive onto this property through the front gate, many times they'll say, I just feel something really, really different and really special. And it is that vortex of energy that is being generated here every week by all of you who come and help generate it. And it's a blessing. And it's special. And when we're in it, sometimes we even forget about it. But I'm reminded today, just thinking back to those old times, just how special it is, because it's still happening. People are still being touched by that seed energy that Norm initiated so many years ago. And people like White Bear and others came to support and help move into the future. Another interesting thing is that White Bear, his Christian given name was Oswald Fredericks, but he always went by White Bear because that was his Hopi name. And the symbol for White Bear, if he signed something, he would sign it with a vortex and a bear paw. And it was like this white light. That was the white light, this vortex of light, and then white bear paw. And then the last thing that I have said before in other meditations on this topic, that I like this saying so much because it really goes to the heart of practicing truthfulness. And the saying is, nothing is as fast as the speed of trust. And when we have great trust with each other, we can accomplish anything because we're not second-guessing each other all the time about, well, what are your motives? What about this? What about that? We trust each other because we develop trust with each other, because we've been honest with each other and we've invested in each other. And I'm just so happy to have such a wonderful group of people like each one of you to develop that kind of trust with and to accomplish things into the future.
Oh, listen to life's sweet song. Can't you hear how she longs for perfection like in days that are gone? So sweet and oh, so sad. So sweet and oh, so sad. Father, you're melting us all into one bright, shining, blazing sun. And we've all had the blues much too long, so we're all going back home to you. Oh, big wheels are turning round all around us without a sound, and they're spinning within us too. Oh, I can feel the love, can't you? Oh, I can feel the love, can't you? Father, you're melting us all into one bright, shining, blazing sun. And we've all had the blues much too long, so we're all going back home to you. I'm going home to the sea of love, yes, of love. Won't you come on along with me and ride the stars above, and ride the stars above. Father, you're melting us all into one bright, shining, blazing sun. And we've all had the blues much too long, So we're all going back home to you. Yes, we've all had the blues much too long. So